Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Zafar, and in this video we're going to talk about the JavaScript reduce function. So the reduce function is part of the array prototype, so that means we can call it right on any array. So I can create an array really quickly. We'll just call it array equal, and I'll just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now because the reduce function is part of the arrays prototype, I can do array.reduce. So what is the reduce function? What does it really do? So the idea of it is that it reduces our array into a single final value. Okay. Now you decide on that value. It can be a number, it can be a string, it can be an object. It can also be another array if you'd like. So the reduce function will return a final result. So let me just store it in a value called result, right? So now the question is, what does the reduce function take? So the first argument that it takes is a callback function, and we call this callback function the reducer. Okay, so I'm going to write it as an arrow function, just an empty arrow function. So what does this reducer take? So this is our reducer. That's the first argument to the reduce method. So the first argument it takes is the accumulator, and we'll talk about what that means. And the second argument is the current value, and the third is the index, and the fourth is the entire array that we started off with, the original array. So you don't have to supply all of them, but just in case you needed all those four pieces, you can supply them. So this reducer function, this callback function, will be executed on every element of our array, right? So current, the first time, current will be 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. And the index would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the array would always be the original array. And the idea is we want the accumulator, right, to be the final result. So we're going to keep kind of building the accumulator on every iteration, right? And eventually we're going to have one final result. Suppose what I want to do is add up all the even numbers. So I can check, for example, if current modulus 2, right, if it's an even number, if that equals 0. So then what I have to do is return a value, right? And that's important that you actually return a value, because the returned value will be used as the accumulator for the next iteration. Does that make sense? So I'm checking if the current value is even. So what I need to do is I need to return. So what do I return? So I need to return the previous value of accumulator plus the current number, because I'm summing up all the even numbers, right? So I'll do accumulator plus current, right? So we're summing up the current value, which is an even number because we're doing the check right here, and I'm summing it with the previous value of accumulator. So I can't just leave it like this, because what if the number is odd? Then we're not returning anything. So the next iteration accumulator will be undefined. So I must do an else, and then I'll do return just the accumulator without adding it. But we have one small problem with this code, and actually let's return, right? So I'm going to return the result so we can see it. So I'm executing this function right here so we can see the result. So I'll do command enter, and notice we got a 7. So if we take a closer look, what I'm doing is I'm summing up the even numbers, right? So that should be 2 and 4, that should be 6, but I'm getting a 7. So why does that happen? So remember how we said that the accumulator can be anything, right? It can be a string, it can be a number, it can be an object, it can also be another array for that matter. So JavaScript has no way to determine what the value of accumulator will be, if that makes sense. So the idea is it doesn't initialize it to 0 the very first time around. So remember that the accumulator is the returned value from the previous iteration of the reducer function. But what about the very first time that the accumulator or the reducer function runs? What will the accumulator be? If you didn't explicitly set an initial value, what the reduce function will do is it's going to take the first element of this array, use it as an initial value to the accumulator, and it's not going to execute the reducer function against that initial value. Does that make sense? So let's think about it. The first time we're going to initialize accumulator to 1, right? But current, it's going to be 2, right? Current is not going to be 1 because we initialized accumulator to 1. And index will not start off as 0, it's going to start off as 1, right? So we skip the iteration of 1 and we use that as our accumulator. Now to fix this, it's really simple. All we have to do is we need to explicitly supply an initial value to our accumulator, right? So we need to tell the reduce function that the accumulator should start off as 0. So we can do that by supplying a second argument, right? Here's my second argument, 0. So that value will be used as the initial value to the accumulator. And again, it doesn't have to be a number. So now if I execute the function, I'm going to do command enter. So now we got 6. So what happened is that we used 0, right, because we explicitly supplied an initial value to the accumulator, right? It's going to use that the first time around. It's not going to skip the iteration of 1. So I hope this video was helpful. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions or any suggestions for future videos.